The mourners froze when the battered animal limped into view at the tree line. Mud crusted its fur, an old injury twisted its gait, and pale scars laced its side like forgotten stories. The stray dog was instantly recognizable to those who'd heard the tales. Jim used to call him Scout. For 6 long years, the elusive dog had been glimpsed only in fleeting moments near the far borders of the reserve, but never this close, never among people. A few hands twitched instinctively toward hips, where no sidearms hung, others just stared. The dog's amber eyes swept over the gathering with a strange, piercing focus, then locked on the plain pine casket. He moved forward slowly, each step careful, painful on the dry, uneven ground. Nobody stopped him. When Scout reached the casket, he sniffed once, then gently rested his weathered muzzle against Jim's cold hand. The soft, mournful sound that rose from his throat drifted over the still summer air like a prayer held too long. Yellowstone Wildlife Reserve stretched across 40,000 acres of untouched Wyoming wilderness, a living monument to conservation and stubborn American grit. And old Jim Sullivan had been part of it all, as much a feature of the landscape as the ridgelines or whispering pines. At 78, Jim wore the weather on his face creases, carved by sun, snow, and wind, but his eyes remained bright, sharp as ever. "Animals know more than we think," he'd often say in his gravel-thick voice, a belief that shaped his 52 years patrolling that land. His fellow rangers might have rolled their eyes at his old-school instincts, but they respected him all the same. Where others saw bureaucracy, Jim saw possibility. Where protocols said stop, he sometimes listened to his gut. Mike Thompson had spent 7 years learning from him, soaking up wisdom like thirsty soil. At 34, Mike was the future of the reserve, educated, modern, a man of drones and data, but even he knew some things couldn't be taught. "Books are fine," Jim once told him, "but the land speaks to you just got to be quiet long enough to hear it." Sarah Miller, the reserve's vet, was one of the few who really understood Jim. At 42, she walked the line between modern science and Jim's weather-worn intuition. Together, they'd saved more than a few creatures others would have given up on. Then there was Linda Sullivan, Jim's only daughter. At 45, she lived a world away in downtown Chicago, where she wielded legal briefs instead of binoculars. Over the years, her visits had grown fewer, her calls shorter, until eventually they stopped altogether. Distance had done its work, so had pain. Their relationship had frayed into silence long before that summer. The summer of 2023 arrived dry and punishing. Yellowstone baked under a heat it hadn't known in living memory. Meadows browned, creek beds split like cracked skin, and desperate animals clustered around the last muddy pools. It was during that brutal season, mid-dust, heat, and thinning breath, that Jim set out for one final patrol, never guessing it would be the last time he laid eyes on the land he loved, or the stray dog who never really left. Jim squinted into the sun, the old Jeep rattling under him as he rolled along the fire road. The dash thermometer blinked 102 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerous heat, even for Wyoming. He kept a weathered canteen by his side, sipping sparingly as sweat lined his neck. His doctor had told him to retire after the heart scare last fall. Jim just laughed it off. "I'll leave this job when they drag me out cold," he'd said. "Can't see myself waking up without a forest to check on." Mike's voice crackled through the radio, an injured elk near Harper's Ridge. Jim acknowledged and veered east, tires kicking up dust. His thoughts wandered like they always did to Mary. These drives made it impossible not to think of her. Today would have been their 53rd anniversary. The ache in his chest had nothing to do with arteries. "You wouldn't recognize Linda, Mary," he murmured to the empty seat beside him. "Got herself a fancy title. Suits, heels, all that." The road curved, and with it came a memory, Mary's laugh, echoing in the wind. A 5-year-old Linda dancing with wildflowers at the same bend. But memories always got a twin. With that soft, bright image came the darker one, the screech of wet tires, the truck, the funeral. 11-year-old Linda standing stone still while the world folded around them. Jim forced his eyes forward. Harper's Ridge came into view, and, just beyond it, the Elka Regal bull, standing wrong on his right front leg. Even from the Jeep, Jim could see the swelling, probably a pothole or hidden stump. He parked about 50 yards off, grabbed his gear, and radioed in. "I see him." Moving in for a closer look, he stepped into the furnace of heat, boots crunching dry weeds, sweat already soaking his collar. The elk didn't run. A bad sign. A healthy animal would have been long gone. As he inched forward, something shifted in unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Not grief, something worse. This was pressure, raw and brutal, curling around his ribs like a snake. "No, no, not now," he muttered, fingers fumbling for the pill case in his pocket. But his hands didn't listen. The tiny tablet slipped, vanishing into the dirt. The pain stabbed down his left arm like a live wire. He dropped to one knee, the heat rippling above him. The elk hobbled away. Jim tried to grab his radio, but his muscles betrayed him. He collapsed, the world tilting sideways. Through the blinding pain, something moved in his periphery. He expected claws or teeth, but instead he heard a soft whimper and then, warm, familiar press of a tongue on his hand. "Scout," he rasped. The wild dog stood over him, eyes bright, body tense. 6 years ago, Jim had pulled the pup from the jaws of a wolf pack, nursed him back, then let him go. They'd seen each other since always at a distance, but never like this. "You picked the worst time to visit," old boy Jim groaned. Scout circled, sniffed, then howled a raw, eerie sound that soared over the ridge. Again and again he howled, then nestled close to Jim, trying to nudge him upright. "Not this time," Jim whispered. "Go, get help." The dog hesitated, then turned and ran. Mike found him 30 minutes later. After several visitors called about strange howling, Scout was already there, standing guard over Jim's body, tail still, stance protective. Mike slowed as he approached. Recognizing the dog from Jim's stories, "Easy boy," he murmured. Scout didn't move as Mike knelt to check Jim's pulse, but the silence told him before the fingers did. Jim Sullivan was gone. Gone with the heat, with the elk, with the land. Mike reached for the radio, voice cracking. "We've lost him." Scout stepped back, and when the sirens grew near, vanished into the trees like smoke. None of them would see the dog again until Jim's funeral. Linda Sullivan arrived 2 days later, heels clicking on gravel as she stepped out of her rented car. It was sleek. She was sleeker. Chicago polished and sun-shielded. She moved through the dusty parking lot like someone dropped into the wrong movie. She hadn't been here in years, not since the fight about his health, his refusal to slow down. The Wyoming sun hit her like a wall. Chicago's heat wave had nothing on this here. It was unfiltered, savage, real. She pulled her sunglasses from the console and scanned the building. Mike Thompson stood waiting, posture straight in his ranger uniform. She knew the type, forest-raised, loyal to fault. "Sullivan," he greeted, offering a hand. "I'm sorry, your father meant the world to all of us." She took the handshake without warmth. "Thank you. I understand you were there when he died." Mike hesitated. "Not exactly. I found him ... after. But he wasn't alone." Linda assumed he meant hikers. The park was full. "No," Mike said slowly. "There was a dog, a stray. Your dad saved him years ago. He came back, stayed with Jim, even tried to get help." Linda's face barely moved. Inside, she sighed. Another legend. Another one of her father's stray's animals always came before people. "I've arranged transport to Chicago after tomorrow's service," she said. "Henderson Funeral Home is handling it." Mike blinked. "Chicago. But Jim said he wanted to be buried here." "Lookout Point." Linda's voice tightened. Mike's tone remained calm. "It's in writing." He was very clear. They walked in silence, tension growing between their mismatched footsteps. Linda had spent her life in negotiations. But this, he should be with family, she said sharply. "With Mom?" Mike's eyes stayed level. "With respect, ma'am. The land was his family, too." The reserve director, Robert Andrews, met them at the office. His face said everything before he spoke. "Linda, I'm sorry, but Jim was adamant here." He handed her a folder. His final instructions. She read it. The legal language was airtight. "He wanted to be buried where he proposed to your mother," Andrews added. Then he paused. "There's something else. Someone broke into his cabin last night." Linda looked up sharply. "Was anything taken?" "No, but someone went through his things. Photos, papers, no sign of forced entry." Whoever it was knew. "Where to look?" Mike nodded. "We've upped patrols, but thought you should be aware." Linda rubbed her temple. "I want to see it." "I'll take you," Mike offered. The drive was short, but the silence was long. The reserve looked brittle dying in the heat. Jim's cabin hadn't changed, small, sturdy, and somehow alive in the silence. Mike unlocked the door, and Linda stepped inside. The air smelled of pine and old paper. One wall was covered in them, and half were of her graduation law firm opening. News clips. He'd watched her life from afar. He was proud of you, Mike said softly. Said so often. He never told me. Mike pointed to the desk. Linda crossed the room and found a journal open, her name underlined on the page. Above it, pinned photos, dozens of them, showed a dog. A large, scarred animal, always from a distance. "This him?" she asked. Mike nodded. "Scout, your dad saved him. Should have lost his job over it." "Why?" "It broke policy. You don't interfere in predator prey. You don't rehab wild animals," Mike exhaled, "but he did, because it was right." Linda stared at the wall, at the dog, at the man she'd never fully known. A man who loved in quiet ways, in half-told stories and pictures no one else saw. Mike glanced at his watch. The funeral director's waiting. "But before we go," he didn't finish. He didn't have to. She was already reaching for the journal. There, half hidden in shadow, stood a figure low to the ground, still watchful. Linda held her breath, squinting into the fading light. It was him, Scout. Her chest tightened. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, like a ghost tethered to memory. Something told her he wouldn't come if called, not out of fear, but out of some unspoken rule. He had his own way, just like her father had. Turned then, disappearing into the tree line with barely a sound, leaving behind only paw prints and a sense of something sacred. Linda stood motionless for a long time, the breeze lifting her hair, the letter still clutched in her hand. Maybe the dog hadn't been just a rescue. Maybe he was the last thing her father had loved with his whole heart, the last bridge he'd tried to build, and maybe that moment in the trees was his way of saying goodbye. The funeral took place at sunrise. A modest gathering, uniformed rangers, townspeople. Jim had marked in his Bible. Linda watched the crowd, the stories she'd heard echoing in every solemn face. Her heart ached, not just with loss, but with realization. She hadn't lost a stranger. She'd lost a man who had spent his life trying, failing, and quietly hoping for forgiveness. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward with trembling hands. "My father wasn't a perfect man," she began. "He wasn't always there the way I wanted him to be, in the people he helped, in the land he protected, in the silence of his loyalty." She paused, her voice cracking. "And in a dog that still walks these woods, watching over the ones left behind." As the ceremony ended, the sun broke through the smoky haze, casting golden light over the grave. Scout didn't appear again, but his presence lingered like a secret passed from one soul to another. That evening, Linda gathered the letters, her father's journals, and the old photographs. She didn't pack them away, she left them out, where the light could reach them. She sat on the porch swing again, this time not to mourn, but to listen. The pine trees rustled in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled. The reserve, wild and untamed, breathed around her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like an outsider. Because of what she'd inherited, but because of what she'd finally understood, her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was an email from the Chicago office, an urgent case requiring her return. She stared at the screen, then turned it. Face down. Tomorrow, she'd decide. Tonight, she'd stay. There were still things to learn, still pages in her father's story she hadn't read. Was a scarred dog with Amber Ease a guardian, not bound by leashes or rules, but by something deeper. Loyalty. Redemption. A large dog with a noticeable limp lingered near the tree line, his golden brown eyes catching the warm glow spilling from the porch. Scout watched Linda from the shadows, unmoving. "Hey there," she murmured gently, not daring to take a step forward. She didn't want to scare him. The dog tilted his head, those wise eyes studying her with the same deep curiosity Sarah had once described. For several still seconds, they regarded each other across the void, one, the daughter who'd stayed away too long. the other a ghost of loyalty who never stopped coming back. And just as silently as he had appeared, Scout slipped away into the dark. Linda remained on that creaking porch for a long while after, her thoughts spinning on things like forgiveness, and how some bonds managed to hold Evan when we're blind. To them tomorrow, her father would be laid to rest on this land. Tonight, she finally felt what had rooted him here. Jim's death until a small-town journalist published an unexpected column, "Faithful Stray Returns to Mourn Fallen Ranger." It ran with an old, grainy photo of Scout from years back. The story spread. Linda found the attention unnerving, even intrusive, but she understood it. In a time when folks were desperate for meaning, a story like this about a loyal Perro-K9 showing up for his fallen friend was the kind of narrative people clung to. Maybe it was a piece of Jim's legacy, too. Later that night, while packing away her father's things, Linda spotted a small wooden box tucked on his nightstand. Inside, carefully wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was her mother's wedding ring and a folded note. "For Linda, when you're ready, your mama would want you to have this." She slipped the ring on. It fit, like it had been waiting for her. Linda stood at the window and listened, not moving, until the sound faded into the Wyoming night. The morning of Jim Sullivan's funeral arrived with brutal heat. A sun already burning above the ridgelines turned the dry plains into a shimmering sea of gold. By 9 a.m., it was pushing 85, with forecasts predicting triple digits. At the cabin window, Linda watched the dust swirl and rise in tight little whirlwinds while she clasped the silver necklace her dad had once given her mother. The sleek black dress she'd brought from the city felt out of place, almost like armor. It didn't belong here. It smelled faintly of pine resin and sweat of home. She slipped it over the dress and rolled up the sleeves at exactly 10. Mike pulled up in a park vehicle. He was already in uniform, sharp-pressed, shoulders squared. "You ready?" he asked gently as they bounced down the dusty service road. "We've got a big turnout. Director Andrews says it might be the largest memorial the preserves ever had." Linda couldn't imagine who would come, but when they arrived at Lookout Point, she froze. More than 200 people had gathered on the plateau. Rangers in formal attire stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers, shopkeepers, and biologists, old-timers with sun-leathered skin, and families with restless kids. News vans sat quietly behind the crowd, lenses pointed but respectful. "I didn't think she began," Mike nodded. He made a bigger mark than even he realized. Jim's casket, hand-built from lodgepole pine, rested on a raised platform. Around it were wildflowers, photos, hand-painted stones, and a gnarled, old walking stick. Director Andrews greeted Linda with a quiet nod. "The governor couldn't make it," he said, "but he wanted me to tell you that Jim received the state's highest conservation honor last year. There's even a congressman. Here your father helped write some of the wildlife protection bills that passed recently." Linda's throat tightened. She barely knew this version of her father, the public figure, the advocate. As the crowd settled into place, dark clouds began forming on the western horizon, the first hint of rain in weeks. Rangers glanced toward. Jim had personally requested about caretaking the land and honoring all living things. Sarah spoke next, her voice cracking as she recounted Jim's quiet passion for the wild. Director Andrews followed, detailing the conservation techniques Jim pioneered, methods now used nationwide. When it was Linda's turn, her legs trembled. As she approached the simple wooden box, she had prepared a clean, formal speech, one she could have read at any courtroom podium. "I found letters," she said, the words barely louder than the wind. Letters he wrote but never sent. She unfolded one. "This is from 3 years ago, the night I won my first big case," she read aloud. "Linda, I saw you on the news tonight. You reminded me of your mother. That same fire in your eyes. She'd be proud. I know I am, even if I've never said it right." Her voice wavered, but held steady. "We're just stewards, Mia. Whether we protect a forest or a principle, the work matters. Different trails, but maybe we reach the same mountaintop." She looked up, tears brimming. "I thought I came to bury a stranger, but I think I just met my dad." A low rumble of thunder rolled in as Linda stepped back. The wind picked up, and the chaplain and Andrews quickly agreed to speed through. The remaining prayers. That's when Linda noticed the murmuring first, just a whisper among those in the back, then a wave. She turned. There, at the edge of the gathering, stood Scout. Not a fleeting shadow this time, but fully visible. His body was still, wary, but his gaze was fixed squarely on the casket. The crowd instinctively parted, a straight, open line from the ridge to where Jim lay. "It's really him," Sarah whispered. The air shifted. The storm held its breath. Scout stepped forward slow, deliberate. His limp was more pronounced now, each movement careful. Linda didn't breathe. This wasn't normal behavior. This was something else. Scout moved toward the casket with grave dignity. Those close enough could see his age-now grizzled fur, scars like topographic lines across his flanks. He circled once, then stopped, at the head, and from his mouth he released something. Witnesses later argued about what it meant. Some called it instinct, others something sacred. But there was no mistaking what he left. Jim Sullivan's ranger badge, long believed lost during the body's recovery. Tarnished, dented, but real. "How?" Linda began, but her voice failed. Scout turned his eyes to her. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. Several rangers instinctively moved in, unsure if they should intervene. Director Andrews lifted a hand. "Let him be," he said. "This is Jim's day." Another thunderclap boomed across the sky. Scout laid down next to the casket, tense, but not threatening. The chaplain hesitated, then finished the blessing. Not a cry, but a deep, soul-wrenching wail, one that echoed through the dry valleys like a funeral dirge. Then came another, and another, coyotes, wolves, hidden voices joining the old Perro canine in a haunting chorus. Rangers wept. Sarah gripped Linda's hand like a vice. The cameras kept rolling. "It was the most remarkable moment I've ever seen," one reporter would say later. Scout turned to Linda again, eyes locking. Her father's echo alive in that gaze. Then, quietly, he slipped back through the crowd and vanished into the brush. At that moment, the sky broke. Rain slammed down with no warning. A curtain of water drowned the dusty earth in seconds. People scrambled for shelter. Plans and ceremony forgotten. Nature had its own script. Linda stayed where she was, soaked through. Mixed with rain, Mike rushed over with an umbrella. "Come on, we gotta move," he said, nearly yelling over the roar. "Flash floods can hit hard here." She nodded, letting him steer her back toward the vehicles. Behind them, rangers scrambled to protect the casket, covering it with tarps and waiting for the storm. To pass before burial, they reached the truck just as hail the size of quarters began to fall. The metallic racket filled the cab as water poured. Down in sheets, Linda wiped the window with her sleeve, peering out at the storm, reshaping the world. "He would have loved this," Mike said with a smile. Said a good storm was like a reset. Nature's way of clearing the board. Linda chuckled softly. "He used to drag me outside during summer storms. Mom would yell, but he'd just say, 'You gotta feel it to respect it.'" They sat quietly, listening. Then Mike looked at her oddly. "That badge thing," Scout bringing it back. "I've studied animal behavior all my life. That shouldn't be possible." Linda tilted her head. "Maybe not everything has to be explained." The radio buzzed reports of lightning strikes, one fire, already being managed. Mike hesitated. "I should go. I'll be fine." She said Linda stayed in the cab as the storm eased. The pounding rain softened to a steady drizzle, then a mist. Through the passenger window, she saw a silhouette on a distant ridge Scout. One last time, watching over them. Then he turned and was gone. A final act completed. The clouds broke open. Arcs of rainbow light danced across the hills. Steam rose from the ground like a miracle. Dormant seeds dead for months began to stir. It was, everyone would say later, exactly the goodbye Jim Sullivan deserved. As the last drops faded and puddles shimmered beneath a clearing sky, a new danger emerged. Director Andrews approached quickly. "We've got a fire up near Buckhorn Ridge. Lightning strike. With all the dry undergrowth, it's spreading fast." The shift was instant, from grief to action. Radios came alive. Rangers leaped into response mode. Linda turned, the echoes of Scout's howl still in her ears, and somewhere deep down, she knew none of this had been a coincidence. The last of the mourners were being directed to their cars, security gently ushering them toward the main exit routes. Ms. Sullivan lingered beside Director Andrews, her eyes locked on the smoke rising on the horizon. Andrews turned toward her with tight urgency. "We're going to have to delay the burial until this situation settles," he said. "Mike can drive you back to HQ. It's outside the risk zone." Linda gave a slow nod, eyes still fixed on the growing smoke column. "Is there anything I can do honestly?" "Best to clear the area and let the crews do their thing," he said, already heading toward his vehicle. Mike pulled up a second later, his face set in stone. It breached the fire line. "They're calling in extra units from the next counties over, but it could be hours." They rode in tense silence, creeping through a maze of leaving families and flashing press vans. Out the passenger window, Linda watched the smoke rise thicker, meaner. Wildfires weren't unusual in the region, part of the natural cycle, but the extended drought had left the land dry as tinder. When they reached HQ, chaos ruled the place. Radios barked orders, maps were covered in urgent markings, and teams moved with practiced panic. No one paid Linda any mind. She stood frozen on the sidelines, uncertain, until a familiar voice broke through. Sarah, slinging her vet kit over one shoulder, hurried past. "They're clearing the animal rehab center," she said. "I'm going to help evacuate the wildlife." "I'll come," Linda blurted out. Sarah paused. "It's dangerous. I can't just do nothing." 10 minutes later, they were barreling down a dusty trail in Sarah's old pickup, heading for the quiet clearing where hurt animals were treated before being released back into the wild. Smoke stained the air, even with the windows shut. "Your dad helped build this place," Sarah said. "Before this, injured animals had to be driven over an hour out. Most didn't make it. The center was low and practical, nestled like a secret in the trees." When they arrived, 2 young staffers were already loading cages into a van. Inside, chaos was contained in crates, hawks with clipped wings, limping foxes, a dazed raccoon. Linda jumped in, following Sarah's instructions, and found herself carrying a crate holding a juvenile bobcat leg in a splint. The creature's eyes were wide, trembling. "You're okay," she murmured, using the soft, sure voice her father had used with wounded animals. "I got you." They moved quickly, prioritizing the worst cases. The sky darkened, ash drifted like haunted snow, and the radios kept hissing bad news. The fire was fast, winds erratic. "That's the last of them," Sarah called, hoisting a hawk crate into the van. "Let's roll." As they were prepping to leave, a staffer came sprinting from the tree line, panic in his eyes. "East road's blocked. We have to detour north." Their convoy set off, Sarah's truck at the front. Visibility tanked. Smoke swallowed the road. Breathing was hard. Even inside the vehicle, a mile in, they turned a bend and stopped cold. A massive pine had collapsed across the road, still burning. Sarah slammed on the brakes. Gravel crunched as they skidded to a stop, just shy of the flames. "West is blocked," she radioed to the others. "We're turning back." The trucks began a slow, delicate reversal. Linda's breath came in gasps now, the smoke creeping past the filters. Then a garbled transmission crackled through. The fire had jumped again now, racing in from the east. They were surrounded. "This is Miller," Sarah said into the radio, steady but tense. "We're trapped near Marker 17 with live animal cargo. Request immediate evac." The reply was fractured by static, but the gist was clear. Help would come, but it would take time. "There's a fire bunker about half a mile north," Sarah announced, "designed for burnovers. We head there." They moved fast, ditching the vehicles and hoisting crates onto stretchers. Linda found herself beside a teenage volunteer, the bobcat crate between them. The animal now growling softly. "Stick close," Sarah told Linda. "Trail's hard to see." They hiked as quickly as the weight and smoke allowed, following what looked like an animal path, not a trail. Visibility dropped 2 feet. Linda wrapped her shirt around her nose, lungs burning. Then panic, shouts from the rear. Linda turned. They were missing people's shadows lost in the smoke. They veered off the trail. Sarah gasped, hitting her radio. Nothing but static. "I'm going back," she said, pressing her kit into a colleague's hands. "Follow the ridge. The bunker's a quarter mile, you'll find it." "I'm coming to know. Stay with them," Sarah said, firm. Then she vanished into the smoke. The remaining group pressed on. Linda's steps grew slower. Her arms ached. Her ankle throbbed. Then a misstep, a stumble on the bobcat crate hit the dirt. The door sprang open. No, she cried, lunging. But the animal was already gone, a blur into the trees. She took off without thinking. "Wait!" she shouted, chasing through smoke only to stop dead. The trail was gone. The others were gone. She was alone. "Hello!" she called, hoarse. No answer but the fire's hungry crackle. Turning in a slow circle, everything looked the same. Gray choking, endless. Panic clawed up her spine. But the heat forced movement. She picked the path that felt least like hell and pushed forward. Her designer shoes were a joke here, snagging roots, skidding on stones. Then a sharp twist her ankle screamed. "Of course!" she growled, teeth gritted. "Of course!" She tried to stand, failed, crawled. The smoke now so thick she couldn't see her fingers. Her lungs blazed with every inhale. She sank to the ground, mind spiraling. This is how it ends. Her father had died in these woods. Now she would too. Then a bark. Linda blinked. Another bark. Closer. A shape emerged. Not the bobcat. Bigger. Solid. Scarred. "Scout," she whispered. The dog stood firm, his injured leg stiff but his body alive with urgency. He barked again, then moved forward, looking back to be sure she followed. She pulled herself upright, leaning on a branch. Pain lanced her with every step, but she moved. Scout stayed just ahead, pacing himself, checking on her, never letting her fall behind. "Where are you taking me?" She gasped into the bandana wrapped around her face. No answer, of course, but talking kept the panic at bay. Scout never paused, never wavered. They climbed, descended, doubled back, circled fallen trees she could barely see. But Scout always knew the way. Time blurred, maybe 20 minutes, maybe forever. But then thinner air, she could breathe again, sort of. The roar of the fire softened Dot. Then came a slope, rocky and steep. She stopped. "I can't," she said, collapsing onto her makeshift cane. Scout vanished, then reappeared at the base of the rock. She followed and found a narrow passage, hidden in vines. A tight squeeze-butt, it led somewhere. A shelf of rock opened before her, overlooking the disaster. Flames chewed the land below, carving through the forest like a living monster. But ahead, the path climbed and the air cleared. Scout pressed on. The trail widened into a long-forgotten game path. Higher they climbed then. Scout vanished again this time into what looked like solid rock. But Linda limped closer, pushed aside. Bruchand found a cave. Scout waited just inside. She ducked in. The space was dry, about 15 feet deep. Cool still, she collapsed to the floor. "Thank you," she rasped, her eyes locking with Scout's glowing amber ones. As she rested, the shadows of the cave began to speak. A backpack, a first aid kit, a rusted can, footprints, and, tucked in the back, a small collection of carefully preserved objects, an old ammo box, a faded photo, notebooks. Curiosity trumped pain. She crawled to the box. Inside, a leather-bound journal, yellowed maps, notes in a familiar hand, her father's handwriting. The rescue hadn't found her yet, but maybe she was about to find the truth. With fingers that barely obeyed her, Linda peeled back the lid of the weathered box and pulled out a leather-bound journal. The second she opened it, her breath caught. The script was unmistakable. Her father's sweeping penmanship sprawled across the first page, dated 6 years ago. "Found the cave today," was tracking that limping elk. It's perfect hidden from the trails. Good vantage on the north ridge. Could be a shelter if things go sideways. Might stash some supplies here. Andrews would say, "It's overkill, but I've never been one to trust the department's contingency plans." Linda flipped the page, and more entries followed, logs of her father slowly transforming this cave into a private outpost. It painted a vivid picture of a man who had chosen his own path, guarding the land in his own way, often outside the official playbook. And then came Scout. "The dog came back today. Still won't let me near him, but that leg's mending. I left Jerky near South Creek. He took it after I left. I saw the paw prints later." One entry melted into the next, revealing more than just field notes. They revealed connection. Started calling him Scout Fitz. He's got a nose for trouble. Watched him tail a group of hikers veering toward the falcon nests. I showed up to steer them away, and poof, he vanished. 2 days later, he brought me to a deer bleeding in a wire trap, like he knows this place needs watching. The entries grew more personal, more reflective. The last one, dated 3 weeks before Jim died, froze Linda in place. Scout showed up a Get North lookout. Had a coyote pup limping behind him. Stood there till I noticed, waited while I patched the pup up, then slipped away. Swear to God, he nodded at me. Mary would say I'm reading too much into it, but maybe. She was right of always spoken animal better than human. Speaking of which, no word from Linda sent her that birthday card. Wrote my return address big and clear. She knows where to find me, just maybe she doesn't want to. The page trembled in her hand. Here, in this secluded cave, her father had documented more than patrol routes and rescue logs. He had etched his regrets, his stubborn hopes, and his loneliness. She tucked the journal gently aside and began sorting through the rest of the box. There were maps filled with hand-drawn markings, paths of migrating herds, notes about illegal fires, subtle shifts in forest density, a personal surveillance system wholly separate from the reserve's official tracking. But at the bottom of the box, she found something that stopped her breath: a sealed envelope, her name penned across it. Unlike the others, this one wasn't meant for mailing. This one was meant to be found only by her. Here, her hand shook as she broke the seal. Linda, the letter began, if you're reading this, either I finally got brave enough to bring you here or someone else did after I was gone. Probably the latter, knowing how things go for me. This cave, this land, it's been my refuge. Yep. The reserves got shelters and cameras, but I needed a spot that was mine, a place I could keep vigil the way I see fit. Your mom used to joke that I didn't trust authority. She wasn't wrong, but this place, it's sacred. Linda, you breathe it in, and it doesn't let go. The dawn air, the hush before birdsong, the echo of your own breath. That's what held me together after your mother passed. After you left, I know I failed you. When Mary died, I folded into the one thing I knew: this land and the animals that needed me. And by the time I realized the gap between us, it felt too wide to cross. His words cracked something open in her. If you found this, maybe you get it now. Maybe this place is speaking to you too. This land isn't just Tyrannets, a world that responds to care, to loyalty, to quiet attention. Like Scout. Just a mutt to most, but he's got more soul than half the rangers I've trained. He remembers what matters. I was slow to learn that. Maybe now, finally, you'll understand. I didn't love you any less. I just didn't know how. To love you and this place at the same time. I hope you can forgive me for that. Signed simply, All My Heart. Dad. Tears carved tracks down Linda's face as she folded the letter and clutched it to her chest. Just then, Scout's sharp bark broke the stillness, yanking her attention back to the present. She staggered to the cave entrance, steadying herself with one hand on the rock wall. Scout stood out on the ledge, his ears up, gaze fixed skyward. Linda followed his line of sight, and there it was, a helicopter, small but unmistakable, approaching from the west, slicing through the smoky sky. You want me to signal? She asked him hoarsely. He barked once, then looked back at her, insistent. Digging through her father's old pack, she found the emergency mirror, stepped out into the light, and angled the glint toward the chopper. She held her breath. A minute passed, then another, nothing. But just as despair gripped her, the helicopter banked, turning toward them. Relief flooded through her body. They'd seen it. They were coming. As the thrum of blades grew louder, Linda turned to thank the dogbutt. The ledge was empty. Scout was gone, like he'd never been there at all. The downdraft of the hovering chopper lashed her hair against her cheeks. A rescuer descended, his orange suit garish against the haze. His eyes widened when he spotted her, probably not expecting to find a limping woman in half-burned ranger gear waving from a cliff. Linda Sullivan, he shouted over the noise. We've been searching for you. Are you hurt? Ankle, she called, pointing. Might be sprained. How'd you know I was missing? Director Andrews put out a bulletin. Said you were Jim Sullivan's daughter. Everybody's been looking for you. He buckled her into a harness and radioed the pickup. As they were hoisted up, Linda glanced one last time into the trees, hoping for a flash of fur. Nothing. Scout had vanished into the smoke. Back in the chopper, a paramedic wrapped her ankle and checked her vitals, while the pilot relayed the successful evac through the headset. Linda heard cheers and relief from command. We found the others, the medic told her, voice calm and reassuring. Sarah Miller and the crew made it to the bunker. Even the animals were secured. You were the last unaccounted for. Linda hesitated, then said, "There was a dog, a stray scout. He led me to the cave, my dad's cave. That's how I survived." The medic gave her a skeptical glance, exchanging a look with the other rescuer. "A dog brought you to safety?" he asked gently, like speaking to someone recovering from delusion. Linda didn't argue. She just nodded and turned to the window, watching the burning forest slip away beneath them. They landed 20 minutes later at the reserve's helipad. Mike was there, eyes raw, pacing. When he spotted her, he ran forward, steadying her other side as she was helped out of the chopper. "Jesus, Linda," he whispered, "and Sarah said you hadn't come out with the others." "I'm okay," she said, though the smoke in her lungs disagreed. "Scout found me." Mike froze. "Scout, you saw him again." Before she could answer, the medics whisked her inside. Oxygen masks, IVs, a flurry of hands. Her ankle wasn't broken, just twisted bad. Her lungs would heal. The worst had passed. Evening came, and the fire's glow still flickered on the horizon. Then a knock. Mike entered with a duffel bag. "Thought you'd want something real to wear," he said, handing it over. "From your dad's cabin?" "Thanks," she replied softly. "Any word on the fire?" 60% contained. The rain and wind helped. He sat beside her, hesitant. "The director wants to reschedule your father's burial day after tomorrow. If you're ready," she nodded. Then, carefully, "Did anyone find Scout?" Mike studied her. "You really did see him out there, didn't you? He saved my life, led me to a cave full of journals. A letter for me." "Sounds like Jim," Mike said. "Always had a plan. Always hoped you'd come back." And Scout, there have been sightings. A big dog near the east side guiding firefighters to flare-ups vanishes before anyone gets close. Linda smiled, imagining the scarred dog still patrolling the land. "My dad said he remembers kindness. Returns loyalty with loyalty." He believed it, Mike said, and maybe he was right. The next morning, Linda left the infirmary on crutches. Against advice, she asked Mike to drive her to Harper's Ridge where her father died. The place wasn't scorched, still green, still alive. Mike helped her down the slope, guiding her to the spot. "He was tracking an injured elk," he said. "Never made it back. We found princes and scouts." Linda nodded slowly. He wasn't alone then. The wind stirred through the pines. After a long silence, she said, "I want to see the rehab center." Though it had been evacuated, the facility was untouched by flames. That morning, the animals had returned. Sarah welcomed them with a relieved smile. "You scared the hell out of us," she told Linda, embracing her carefully. "How's the ankle?" "Getting there," Linda replied. "I needed to see this place. I never realized how much of my father lived here." Sarah gave them the tours, showing Linda the center's roots, how Jim fought for its funding, how his techniques were now used nationwide. "The Sullivan method," Sarah said, pointing to a framed photo of Jim and a healed golden eagle. "He changed everything." "I didn't know," Linda whispered. "He never told me." "He wasn't the type," Sarah replied. "He just did what needed doing." As they walked, Linda stopped short. A staffer was coaxing a skittish bobcat with a splinted leg. Linda blinked. "That's her, the one that escaped when I dropped the crate." "Found her this morning," Sarah said, "under the porch. Someone must have brought her back." The unspoken name hung between them. Scout. That night, Linda and Mike gathered everything: journals, maps, photos packing up Jim's life. "What are you going to do with all this?" Mike asked. Linda paused, eyes steady. "Honor him, for real this time. Lookout point." The next morning, the fire was out, though ash lingered in the breeze. The memorial was simple, just staff, a few old friends, and Linda. But in her heart, she felt it was finally right. With many friends still absent due to the wildfires, the burial was small. As Jim's casket finally touched the earth he had spent a lifetime protecting, Linda stepped forward, her heart pounding, her hand clutching a worn canvas pouch. One by one, she laid each item into the grave. His first ranger badge, dulled by time. A sun-faded photo of him laughing beside her. Mother, a hand-carved wolf figurine he'd kept on his desk since she was a child. And finally, a weathered leather collar. The tag simply etched with the word Ranger, the name of the dog she'd given him so many years ago. My dad lived in two worlds, she said, voice trembling as she faced the mourners. The one I knew distant, dazzling, showing up now and then for birthdays or milestones, and the one you all knew, fierce, committed, completely bound to this land and its creatures. She paused, gathering herself. I came here angry at that second life, though. One that took him from me, but I'm leaving knowing both lives mattered, the ranger and the dad, the guardian of wilderness, and the man who never gave up hoping I'd find my way back. Once the last shovel of dirt had settled, Director Andrews stepped forward, a folded document in his hand, his expression solemn. In recognition of James Sullivan's 52 years of service to Yellowstone Wildlife Reserve, he said, lifting his voice just enough for the others to hear, the board has voted unanimously to rename the northern sector, the land. Jim patrolled for most of his career as the Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary. A murmur of agreement passed through the group like wind through dry grass. That northern terrain had been Jim's domain, his compass point, his home base. As the ceremony came to a close and the guests began to scatter, Linda lingered at the gravesite, one hand on her crutch, lost in thought. Mike approached quietly, hesitant. We just had another scout sighting, he said low, like it might spook something. One of the maintenance guys saw him near your dad's old cabin, said it looked like he was waiting. Linda gave a slow nod, her answer already forming. I'm not flying back to Chicago yet, she told him. I've put in for a leave at the firm. There's something here I have to finish. A month later, the newly named Sullivan Wildlife Sanctuary held its first public dedication. State leaders, conservationists, and local press filled the viewing deck. Linda, still leaning slightly on her cane, stood behind the podium and addressed the crowd with quiet resolve. My father gave everything to protect this land and those who call it home, she said. Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of the James Sullivan Wildlife Protection Fund. It will support habitat restoration, animal rehab, and the center he helped create years ago. What she didn't share was that she had drained her own savings and sold her downtown condo to fund it, or that she had quietly accepted a legal role at the reserve, working mostly remote, but staying 1 week each month at the log cabin that now bore her name. As the crowd mingled in the speeches, Linda stepped away to catch her breath. From the far tree line, a figure emerged. Scout, partially hidden in the underbrush, his grizzled snout and one good eye catching the light. Only someone who knew him would have noticed. Linda murmured a polite excuse to the governor's aide and slipped away toward the viewing platform's edge. Scout watched her approach, not flinching, not advancing, just waiting. Hey, old man, she said softly, stopping a few yards away. His amber eye studied her, deliberate and steady. Then, as if making a decision, he lowered his head in a slow, intentional nod, not submission, not fear, recognition. Without a sound, he turned and padded into the forest, not fleeing, not lost, just continuing, carrying out his silent mission. Linda let out a shaky breath, her father's last words echoing in her memory. He remembers kindness, he returns loyalty with loyalty. Her eyes filled with tears. I get it now, Dad, she whispered. I finally get it. In life's stillest moments, we often come to understand too late what should have mattered all along. Jim Sullivan's legacy reminds us that the ties we build to our family, to the land, and even to a stray animal we once helped are what endure. Most of us know what it's like to bury ourselves in work, to let silence grow between loved ones, to save hard truths for a later that never comes. But Jim's life teaches something else too, that it's not too late not to leave behind. Words that heal, not to carve out a corner of this world where others can feel safe, not to forgive, even after death. Linda discovered that her father's love had always been there, it just wore a different shape. And Scout, that unforgettable dog, showed us that loyalty doesn't require words, that sometimes the ones we once rescued come back to rescue us. As we reflect, maybe we'll find that reconciliation can appear in ways we never expected, and that the story we leave behind matters deeply to those still searching for who we were.